Good morning, Colin. How are you?
It's good. It's good. It's all good to be here. Thank you for taking your time out of your very busy day to do this with us. Perhaps for our members across the GCC, if you could just give us a little bit of your background from Canada and your experience so far and kind of your history. Who are you as a Canadian?
Thank you very much. Maybe I'll start with just a reflection. I moved to Canada in 1997 from the United Kingdom, and I have lived in Canada and the US over that period of time since 1997. I recently moved to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, specifically on January the 5th. I arrived in Saudi Arabia. Before I arrived here, my last position was the Chief Technology Officer of the City of Toronto, Canada's largest city and fourth largest city in North America. So I was the chief that was responsible for the technology vision, strategy, direction. And now, in moving to Saudi Arabia, I'm the Vice President of Digital and Analytics, and I work for the Royal Commission for AlUla. AlUla is based um, in Saudi Arabia. It's a UNESCO heritage site, and it's also one of the seven wonders of the world. And what we are doing in partnership with various stakeholders is to regenerate Lula into a world tourist destination, uh, revitalize the area in terms of ensuring heritage and culture are very important. So, as the head of digital and analytics, my role is to embed digital and data into the landscape and the way that we are approaching in delivering the
Right.
value and the opportunity for the world to see this great location.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was a very good summary. So, what brought you to Saudi Arabia? Obviously, you had an excellent position at the City of Toronto. You're in sort of Canada. Why would you choose to pack up and move to AlUla in Saudi Arabia?
Toronto, just to start off, is that within my experience in Toronto, and I've lived in other parts of Canada, Winnipeg, I've lived in New Westminster, just outside Vancouver. Wonderful experience since 97 and walked in the US, as I mentioned. The city of Toronto, where I walked on, was, a wonderful experience for me. I was there from 2017 to recently. And it brought so much engagement and vitality and vibrancy, and working with such excellent, diverse set of challenges, but also as well as that a great opportunity. I think at this stage of my life, this opportunity, it wasn't planned. I actually had in 2019, I traveled to Dubai as the chief technology officer to give a
Right.
presentation on artificial intelligence.
Right.
And actually, it was at that stage whereby it was my first experience in the Middle East. And Dubai obviously is a city that has for 10, 15 years, the path of digital has really expanded and grown. So it was a really great experience being there for that period of time. So going back in 2019, I didn't really think too much about specifically coming to leave Toronto. But this opportunity just approached in 2020, early on in 2022. But the region started approaching me in the winter of 2021. So I started to have some contact with various initiatives approaching me, and specifically the mega projects.
Yeah.
And that's when it opened up in terms of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I started doing a lot of research on Vision 2030, and it just expanded. And what I found that what the ambition and the vision here was something globally I'd never seen. Their aspirations, the way they wanted digital to be a real embedded part of their journey, the value proposition just certainly opened up my thinking, and I started exploring with various conversations. For me to leave Toronto, it had to be a once in a lifetime opportunity. Toronto
Right.
was so much to me, and I felt that to make impact um, in a broad scale, and to, quite frankly, implement certain aspects that this country would provide certain frameworks to be able to implement some of the policies and
Right.
some of the areas
Right.
that we thought about. It was just something that I felt that it was a calling at this stage of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I just thought it was just incredible. And I thought that if I did not lean into this opportunity at this stage, it was something that I may reflect on in future. So it was a once in a lifetime
Right
opportunity
on.
that brought me out of, in fact, leaving Canada, and this is it.
So quite a different level of expectations coming from Canada to Saudi Arabia. Scale and complexity and the remarkable sort of nature of the projects happening here in Saudi. Have those expectations been met? Has your experience so far delivered on the promise that you thought was possible by moving to the Middle East?
I'll just first start. If I break it down into people, and I break it down into the culture, and I then break it down into what I've seen since January the 5th, 2023 on transformation, the answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there is a jewel here that is not as well known in certainly the Western world. It's the largest digital transformation even I have seen now, and this is my fifth country. I've lived in the
Right.
United, I've lived in England, I've lived in Canada, and the pace of change that is happening here is unprecedented. And I mean the pace of just so many changes. So in terms of, I did not have any specific viewpoint. I felt I was going to come in with an open mind, but it is accelerated. The culture, the friendliness of the people, the way they've showcased and absorbed in terms of wanting me to feel connected with them. I've been extremely impressed. The ambition is large without a shadow of a doubt. But the resources, the passion, the focus on vision, the ability to really demonstrate is quite incredible. And the testament I give to that is that there was recently a conference that has just occurred. It was called LEAP in the
Mm-hmm.
early
Right.
February. It had over 200,000 people all across the world in Riyadh. So, and I have an office in Riyadh. So, in terms of that, it's been a wonderful experience. Of course, only, 2 months, but the decision I made every day that I'm here just validates that it was the right
Mm.
decision at this
Mm.
stage of my life.
Interesting. Certainly, in my experience with many Canadians here and sort of my family and friends back in Canada, it's a very different cultural environment here than back home. A different sort of people, food, customs, religion, and so on. Um, how has your transformation been from kind of the cultural sort of landscape and urban fabric of Canada to here, which is so very different in so many ways?
It's funny because I think I was having this conversation yesterday with somebody from the United Kingdom. Um, and I think that difference has to be reflected on your own personal journey.
Mm.
So I wasn't born in Canada. I arrived in Canada in 97 after my undergraduate. So I,
Right,
I was born
right.
in Nigeria. I grew up in the United Kingdom. So for me, um, it's it's different language, different culture, but because I have lived in various different places, my viewpoint is that I come with humility. So when I arrive, I come with, I'm open-minded. It's different, yes. But what I've been told is that the past 3 years through Vision 20 has fundamentally transformed the
Mm.
place. So I'll give a simple example. My first weekend, I went to the mall. I could be in a Western mall. I
Mm-hmm.
was in Riyadh. I mean, the Canadian stores were there. Canadian British stores were there.
Yeah.
Yes, there's a balance. People are dressed traditionally, some are dressed more Western. So I think the transformation of the country is incorporating their culture and heritage. And I think as an expat, come in with humility to be a strong ambassador to recognize that what we have in Canada is one aspect of the globe, but there are other cultures But what is very similar to all of us is that we all want to contribute in a positive way. We
Mm,
want to ensure that our families are looked after. We want to be courteous. If we come with those principles, for me personally, it is more humility and integration. But that's because this is my fifth country.
interesting.
If I'd
Right,
lived in
right, right.
Canada maybe all my life, it could be a difference. So for me,
Yeah,
it's more of an integration and in that respect.
yeah.
But that's my
Yeah, cool.
experience.
I had lived in Dubai for 15 years before coming to Saudi. So I kind of understood the region relatively well. So it was a simple adjustment. But I think you're right. If you had been born and raised in Winnipeg and had never left Canada, and you went from Winnipeg
Yes,
directly to AlUla, that would be a massive shock to your system, right? But I think having seen the
100%.
world, having experienced a few of your different cultures, developing that sensibility around adapting and being flexible on sort of like daily norms and standards of behavior, I think it's a little easier if you've seen the world.
Yes, and but are there things that are certainly different? Yes. I'll give an example. Um, this country is built on, is really transitioning now in terms of, wanting to recognize their heritage, which is very important. But just the simple things of if you come here as a resident and the ability to recognize it digitally, they are really pushing. So, for example, when you get your Ikwama is everything. It's your permanent residency card.
Yeah,
In
yeah,
our Western country, we're still doing it on paper. We're still doing it
yeah,
on a card.
yeah,
So here, once you link your phone, you are now essentially connected to the ecosystem to allow you to operate. So if you're somebody who is, I mean, if you come from Canada where you're used to paper records or you're used to, contacting these organizations and you're not, as comfortable digitally, it is an
yeah,
adjustment.
yeah, yeah,
It
yeah. I
is very
agree.
much an
I agree.
adjustment. Uh, you know, and I'll give another example. The city of Riyadh is almost three times the city of our largest city in Toronto. It's
Mm,
almost 8 million people here. So, so with that, there's a lot more, of course, there's a lot
yeah,
more activity. So if you come from Winnipeg or you come from, Halifax or you come from Regina,
yeah, yeah,
come into a big city, it's like even if you go to Toronto, it is going to be an adjustment. It's a hustle and
yeah.
bustle.
I agree. I
But
agree.
if you then move to like AlUla would be a lot more, it's a lot more smaller. Our population is about 40,000. It's really a county. So I think, yes, definitely you would see things different. And of course, the language,
Right.
there's both languages,
Yeah,
very well spoken. So there, and then there is the living aspect, a lot of expats live in compounds, and there's that sort of adjustment
yeah,
in terms of that lifestyle. So I think that it's definitely a big adjustment if you've lived all your life in one
yeah,
area, but that's no different to moving to Asia or moving
yeah,
to Africa and the continent there. So for me, I think that I came with a bit of a different lens to say I've lived in Africa in terms of Nigeria. I've lived in all these different places. So I'm going to take a mindset that says I'm going to come here
mm,
and I'm going to come with an open mind and look through the journey and really come with a humble approach and an ambassador approach to how can we both, in terms of two different cultures, find an ability that at the end of the day, we're all humanity. So that's my attitude, personally speaking.
how very Canadian of you, Lawrence. That's a great
That's
attitude.
very,
Ha-
very Canadian.
have there been
Yes.
any pleasant surprises along the road? Some things you came here and discovered you had anticipated, but were like a surprise, a pleasant surprise.
Yes, I think that it's a quiet, they have I think the level of number one, the level of their hospitality is not talked about enough.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree with
I
that.
I mean, I think that that's been, I wouldn't say again, I wouldn't say it's a surprise because I never had any, peace. I'll give an example. In my first weekend here, a colleague said to me, let me take you out in terms of the you've been in your hotel room. So we went about, and he took me to in the west of Riyadh. He took me with his son. We went on a picnic. You know, I've only been in the country like days,
Yeah, yeah,
and he just opened it up, had a very so the level of hospitality he showed me in parts of Riyadh. He had dinner. They are the culture just they were so warm and so kind, and so that was really very nice because in a big city, everybody is busy. And
yeah,
for people to take their time and want that, so I thought it was really pleasant. Again, the level of what I've been really taken aback is their level of digital transformation. I
mm,
mean, I've not, as I said, I've lived various places. I haven't seen anything like it. There's nothing like it.
yeah,
The ability to be connected in your phone, in the aspirations we have in Canada of digital identity.
yeah,
It's
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's at a pace here that quite
Are very
frankly, now
modest.
of course
Yeah,
it's very interesting. So I think they've been very modest. I think that also as well as that, I think what we in Canada and North America um, a lot of my friends and families are very curious. So I've been communicating through my social platform in terms of really exploring people to, there is activity happening here that is on an unprecedented level.
yeah, yeah,
Safety, I feel very safe. I feel I can move around. I've traveled. I was in Medina a couple of weeks ago. I feel very comfortable. There's ride share that's here in terms of certainly in Riyadh. So all these aspects um, that one may have a viewpoint coming from Canada or in the West,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I
it's not
think
what I've
there's
seen.
obviously, I've often felt that one of the challenges that Saudi feels is basically public relations. And what Saudi was 10 years ago is very different than what Saudi is today. It's dramatically changed. And in
Correct.
fact, 5 years from today, it will be dramatically, even so much more dramatically different as well. I mean, it's changing so quickly. I mean, there's a Tim Hortons about 300 meters from where I'm sitting right now.
Yes.
There's an Eataly down the street with like
Yes.
three modern shopping malls within
Yes.
half a kilometer of me. The restaurant scene here is remarkable. So I have found the
Correct.
quality of life here, in contrast to certainly what my family and friends in Canada, their perception through the Canadian media filter, how they see sort of
That's
Saudi Arabia versus the reality on the ground. And your first point about the welcoming, hospitable nature of Saudis, I think is absolutely true. I have found the Saudis in general to be sort of really charming and warm people. I've been very surprised, not surprised, but I've been very pleased to see that, and that you are clearly the minority here as a Westerner in Saudi, and yet I've been made to feel completely at home.
yes, and I will say that in that respect, in every country that I've lived, bar Nigeria, I've been the minority for the past there. So in some
Right?
ways,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
in your comment is that it's kind of refreshing that you are now seeing the lens from being a minority because some of us in Canada and in
yeah,
the US where I've lived and in England, we've been living that lens for 30, 40 years. And I
yeah,
think that creates, and I think if a Westerner comes, especially if a Westerner that is not, a Westerner that comes from the majority, it's good to come here to recognize that there is an aspect, and it may give a lens in terms of what it's like to be a minority in a majority
yeah,
country. So
yeah.
I
True.
get with that.
Would you say you've any unexpected challenges? Let me give you an example of what I mean. Is that the unusual thing that I find about Riyadh is there are basically no regulations around parking. Right? You can park anywhere, and there's no fines, there's no laws, there's no penalties. You can park wherever you want, and I have found that difficult. I mean, of course, you can drive around and go wherever you want, but the absence of any regulations on parking, because I'm used to so much structure, right? In Canada, everything is very, very structured, and here, some things aren't structured as well, and parking for one thing is one of them. Is there anything that you found here that was a challenge? Again, that was you hadn't anticipated.
So again, Colin, I think that I want to be I want to come across with a viewpoint is that again, I come as a lens. It's an attitude. So where you make comment on it, which I do, understand about unstructured, I look at it with the viewpoint is that, well, Canada and some of these countries are hundreds and hundreds of centuries old.
Hmm.
So the fact of if we had to start Toronto again, or we had to start Canada again,
Right.
or we had to start United States again, would we
Yeah.
really be that structured and regulated?
Right.
So my
Right.
attitude is that my attitude is that um, Riyadh is a big city. There's a lot of people. The driving, can be quite hectic. Um, but I look at it in the lens that um, you almost have to be, you have to come from a viewpoint that says, if we look at what the transformation is occurring, which in most people are telling me it's the last sort of 3 to 5 years, it's understandable that it's this way.
Yeah.
And in a
Yeah.
few years, so I see it as a way is that how can I be comfortable with being uncomfortable and recognizing that in time it will get there. So in that respect, I spend a lot of time asking the local Saudis, like, what is the right things to do?
Right.
So
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
this normal?
Yeah. Yeah.
If I can't find parking, what should I do? Should I there? So for me personally, I haven't been here as long as you, so I take Uber.
Right.
I don't really want to. I don't. Initially, I'm
That's the
not in that
workaround.
hesitant
Right. Right.
to be dry. So it's about until I get more familiar with the parking, with the unstructured, with there. I want to limit my viewpoint of any sort of perceived frustration. And so that's how I mentally process it. Yes, you're
Interesting.
absolutely right. Is there things, walkways? You're right. I mean, it's a very car-driven place in Riyadh in terms of that. In Medina, it was that. But I decide to frame my lens and say, okay, and when I move around, I will ask, I'm wanting to do X, Y, and Z. And I will go to somebody who lives here and I say, if I want to do X, Y, and Z, what would be your best recommendation
Right.
so that I
Yeah.
have an
Yeah. Right.
experience?
Ask
It's
the
going to be
locals. Yeah.
relatively, yes, ask the locals. And so I think what that does is it takes any viewpoint I have in Canada. I don't
Hmm.
do a comparison for me. I
Right.
just, as soon as I get on the plane, I just park that. That is gone.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I say to myself, again, this is my opinion. I say to myself, it's
Fair
a
enough.
clean slate. So if I come here as a clean slate, what do I need to do? Now, what I recognize is that you have to be tenacious. You have to ask a lot of questions. You've got to breathe a lot. You've got to be
Hmm.
mindful.
Yeah.
You've got to recognize that the governance and all the things we have has taken many, many years, and we still don't get it right. So I'll give an example. There are Canadian cities that sometimes when you go to park in that respect, it's still asking for money in the parking meter.
Yeah. Right. Right. Right.
So let's just be
Yeah.
really balanced. And I don't know about you,
Yeah.
but in Winnipeg, at minus whatever the minus number in the prairies, or even in Ontario, I would rather be comfortable in my car. Now in Toronto, they have a Green P app. It's actually one of the best apps in everything that we do. So I say to myself, if I come here and those aspects are a little bit different, I
Yeah.
say to myself, well, what can I compare it with our own country that, quite frankly, is a little bit different? So, yes, am I going through many things? But the way I frame it in my head provides a lot more perspective and balance for me. And I don't think too much. I'm like, okay, this
Fair
is the
enough.
system. Let's go with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Great.
That's my
Listen,
opinion.
one final question for you, Lawrence. I mean, if you were 25-year-old, sort of recent graduate in any sort of field that you have sort of in Canada, have not traveled the world very much, um, and they had an opportunity to come to the Middle East, would you advise them to take it? And what advice would you give them in terms of that transition? Having not seen a lot of the world come from Canada to the Middle East, what advice would you give to them?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is yes, take it. And I'll give an example. Since I came here and I've been posting, I post on LinkedIn in there, and I have two or three people a week who are approaching me to come here.
Right.
because
Right.
they've never had as much information. So the first answer, yes, I would take it. The second answer is that I would do a lot of research to ensure you don't come with a biased viewpoint.
Hmm. Yeah. Fair
So,
enough.
as
Yep.
somebody who's
Yep.
25, there's more access to, when I was 25, we didn't have a lot of information certainly there. So, I'll give one perfect example. Go and read Arab news, get it on your phone.
Hmm. Right.
Arab news will give you a lot of balanced
Yeah.
bias of this part of the world. Do a lot of research. If you're 25, I would hope to think your social media and research skills are a lot more higher than when I was 25. So go and read other news channels, go and read information that gives you a balanced perspective. And then look for community groups like through this forum that you could contact
Right.
people to say, you've lived here a little while, can you give me that viewpoint? I think do a lot more research and then ensure that you come here with a viewpoint that says, I'm just going to leave mentally what my expectations of coming from Canada, and I'm going to come here for a new slate. But in terms of opportunity and growth and pace, and even if you're here for a number of years, there is no other place in the world that is growing this fast that will test you and will put your skills to use. And you will be a better, not just better in your profession, but I think you'll be a better human being. And we need more people in these regions so that we can have a much more balanced perspective of other cultures in the world. So
Yeah.
I would say jump at it, do it.
Fair enough. Great. Well, listen, Lawrence, thank you so much for your time this morning. I thought that was a very, very good summary of your experience here with some really sort of valuable insight. So we'll post this to our
Thank you.
members. And thank you again, Lawrence. I appreciate your time today.